Welcome and thank you for coming this morning to Inside Student Affairs with Mike Coomes. Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about the format that we're going to do today. So inside the Actors Studio, how many people are familiar with Inside the Actors Studio? Wow, lots of people. Okay, so for those who aren't, Inside the Actors Studio was a show that was started on Bravo in 1994. It involves James Lipton interviewing actors, like lots and lots of big name actors, in front of a studio of students. There have been almost 200 of those interviews on Inside the Actors Studio. And on the 200th interview, James Lipton chose someone to interview him as a commemoration of that program. So today is an echo of that program, whereas Mike Coomes has been doing these sorts of interviews for about a decade at ACPA, interviewing some of the biggest names and most treasured careers in student affairs to come over the last decade and talk to folks at ACPA. As Mike is approaching his retirement, we've turned the tables and Mike has given me the great honor of interviewing him for this session today. One of the other things I want to say about Inside the Actors Studio, as I mentioned, it's with an audience of students. And so the purpose of this interview is to take the work and the career and the art of this actor and provide some context to understand their life, their thinking, some of the things that shaped their career. So it's not just this big, fully formed career, but to understand the history and the context that got that person there for two reasons. One, to better understand the craft and what you're doing, but also for acting students to think about their own careers and how that fits in. So on that model, I want to say a special welcome this morning to all the students who have come, and I hope you learned some things about Mike, but also some things about yourself as you think about careers in student affairs. Okay. So as we shift from thinking about Inside the Actors Studio and James Lipton, who I look a little bit like, we'll shift into Mike and ACPA. So we're going to learn a lot about Mike Coomes. I think there's some folks in the audience who probably already know a lot about Mike Coomes, and hope we get some sort of tidbit that maybe you didn't know. But for those who don't know Mike, I want to give you just a little bit of an overview before we get started. So Michael D. Coomes is an associate professor of higher education and student affairs at Bowling Green State University. His career has spanned almost 40 years in student affairs, 29 of them at Bowling Green State University in the Higher Education and Student Affairs, or HISA program, 13 years of those as chair or director. In that role, he's shaped curriculum and culture, and through generations of Bowling Green State University students, the profession of student affairs. He's written on financial aid, the history of student affairs, the millennial generation, but many people will know him most for his teaching. He's taught nearly every required course in the BG College Student Personnel Program, as well as the doctoral program. He's led 7 summer study programs to the UK and Europe. He's chaired 13 dissertations, 5 master's theses, and been on 52 committees, helping and supporting students. He's won the NASPA 4 East Outstanding Contribution to Student Affairs Through Teaching Award in 1997, and the Bowling Green State University Master Teacher Award in 2014. And today, here at ACPA in particular, we are thinking about the Inside the Student Affairs Profession session and turning the tables on Mike. So if I could ask Mike Coomes to please come up. All right.
It's a little odd to be sitting in this chair.
It is. We're going to grill you.
No, I can see there, so I don't have to turn around.
Yeah. So you can get the same view we all do.
Yeah.
So Mike,
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. I expected 3.
I told him that wasn't possible. So.
Well, one of them stands, so that makes it special.
All right. So we're going to start with Inside the Student Affairs Profession. And so you've had a chance to interview lots of interesting people, people you know well. And, how did you come up with this idea to do this sort of program?
Well, you introduced the James Lipton show, and my family and I were big fans of that. We stumbled on it some random Sunday and said, what is this? This guy's just sitting there talking to a person. And we're just entranced with the concept and the idea. And I came to ACPA the next year and thought, wow, there are so many really important people in our field that we don't get to know beyond the writings that they do and the presentations they do. And unless we're in class with them, we don't really spend a lot of time with them. And I thought, what an opportunity to kind of replicate that format. So I sent a program proposal in. He said, I called up George Coomes and said, George, would you do this? And he said, that sounds like the most ridiculous proposal I've ever heard. And I said, I'll buy you a martini. And he said, okay, I'll come. And they accepted it. And it's been part of the program ever since. It's been a great honor to do it, and just so much fun. Because, as you know, they don't probably, this is the culmination of a process. And so I visited every one of those people for a day or 2 days to learn about them. Just to have 2 days of Ernie Pasquarello's undivided attention. That's pretty special. So a lot of fun and a lot of important learning on my part. Yeah.
What do you hope people get from the session?
What's that?
What do you hope people leave when they leave?
From this session or from
any?
Because they're going to start leaving pretty soon. I think you did set it up well. I mean, I really hope that we put a face on the names that people carry around as books and articles and presentations. And every one of these people has had such compelling, interesting stories. From Nancy Ellen to Jamie Washington to Marcia Baxter, and then the stories are all different. So just humanizing the profession. I mean, we're a very human profession anyway, so I think that people resonate with that. I think trying to understand the importance of stories and the importance of legacy that people leave is an important lesson that one walk away from the session. Yeah.
So one name, if you could do an interview with one more person, living or dead, who would it be?
Yeah, well, when you asked me this question the first time, it came right off my tongue, and it's still going to be the same person. And I would love to have had the opportunity to do this with Bob Schaefer. Bob was a longtime faculty member at Indiana University. He was actually there when I went to IU. And he's 99 now. Bob will turn 100 next year. He lives here in Florida. Life magazine in the 1950s did an article on Bob called The Dean of Deans, or A Day in the Life of the Dean, I think is what it was actually. And he was the first APGA president, and just this wonderful, very caring individual who touched the lives of so many people in the IU program, who went through that program in the 50s and the 60s. But right after thinking of Bob, just a whole flood of names came through my head. And then one group of people that it's hard to do groups. I've never done a group. I've done 2 people before, but one group of people, it would be fun. I would love to have had the opportunity still, and maybe we could pull this off, I don't know, to do my classmates at IU, because it's a pretty impressive group of people. Joe Carnegie's sitting out there. I think Pat Love might be in the audience, and Kathy Manning, and Liz Witt, and Bob Schwartz, Doug and Fran Oblander, and I'm missing some important ones, but to have that group of people be able to talk to them, because we've got ACPA presidents in that group, and very well-respected researchers and scholars. And, it was just such a blessing to be part of that experience. So those are the 2. But Mel Hardy would have been wonderful to do.
Yeah, I gave you dead people.
Esther Lloyd Jones.
I like dead people. So.
Yeah, Esther Lloyd Jones would be. Yeah, a lot of people. Maureen Wilson.
You could just go down the road, so you don't miss anybody, Mike. All right, let's shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
Who are these people?
That's my mom and my dad. The picture, the 2 portraits, those hang in our living room. So I get to see them 3 or 4 times a day. And the middle portrait, I'm not sure, the picture of the couple, I'm not sure where that was taken or when, but I think probably in Germany. My dad grew up in Oregon, and my mom grew up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. They met at Fort Ord, California in 1940 or 41, I can't remember exactly. Were married. My dad then shipped off, served in the infantry, and the Coastal Artillery. His first station he was in Astoria, Oregon, in the Coastal Artillery defending Oregon against invasion by the Japanese. He did a really good job because they never invaded. Then they sent it up into the Aleutians, and most people don't know that they were fighting with the Aleutians off Alaska. And then they sent him to Officers Candidate School, and he ended up in Italy in the 10th Mountain Division. And by about the time the war ended, my brother was on the way, or had actually arrived, my older brother. And my dad got out, went on the GI Bill, went to Riverside Community College, and 2 more children showed up on the scene, my 2 older sisters. And he decided, I can't support a family of 5 on GI Bill being a student. So he went back and re-enlisted in the service, and was sent in 1950 to Japan, which was really good duty in 1950 to be in Japan, and took the family with him. I wasn't around yet, and he was in the infantry when the North Koreans invaded South Korea. So his was the first unit that was sent over because they were right there, 24th Infantry Division. And they sent them over. I was born February that year, and so he's the smartest person I've ever known, and she's the kindest person I've ever known, and I miss them both greatly. It's interesting because parents are so important to our millennial generation students, right? When we talk about the kind of parent, helicopter parent idea. That wasn't my relationship with my parents. I knew that my parents loved me. There was never any doubt. But they had no interest in being my best friend. That was not what our relationship was supposed to be about. My relationship was to listen to them, to do what they told me, and to stay out of the way. And if there was profuse blood at any point, to let them know, and they would take me someplace and get me patched up, and that was about it, you know. So it's a very different relationship, but I never ever once doubted that they were there for me and that they cared for me. It was a little hard because my dad was in the military up until I was probably in the 6th or 7th grade, so we moved around a lot, and that was a little bit of adjustment to move around that much.
So tell us a little bit about your siblings.
Yeah, okay, so that's me on the left of the book. That's the illustrated version of how college affects students. I'm on the page of, I can't see what page number it is, but the picture looks like it's about Tinto's work, I think. So that's my brother on the left. I think, I don't know how it looks on the screen. The older person in the picture is my brother, and the middle person is my younger sister. My brother and I had kind of an interesting love-hate relationship. And that he was my older brother. I was 7 years younger than him, and I kind of idolized him and walked around after him, and he didn't want to hang out with me very much. But we became very, very close as adults. And he passed away about 6 years ago. My sister has a developmental disability and lives in Olympia, Washington, in a group home and works in a shelter workshop. And I see her about once a year, talk to her every other month. Yeah.
So you mentioned you moved around a lot. What sort of places did you call home?
You know, some of them I don't even remember. My sister was born in Cheney, Washington. My dad was a professor of military science and technology at Eastern Washington College at the time. We lived in Jacksonville, Illinois. I remember Jacksonville because that was first, second, and third grade, and Jacksonville, Illinois was a cool place to be as a first, second, and third grader. It had a pool, it had downtown. I mean, it had a square. It's a typical Midwestern town. It's a lot like Bowling Green. So it was just a good place to grow up. We lived, when my dad went to Korea for the second time, we moved down here to Florida. We lived in Palm Beach, Florida, West Palm Beach, Florida for about a year, so my mom could be near her sister and have some family support while my dad was doing his term in Korea. Then we moved to Lacey, Washington, And really, I think of Lacey, a suburb of Olympia, for those who are not familiar with the area. I think of Lacey as the place, that's hometown for me. Because when we moved there, I was in the 5th grade, and I was there through college. And so a lot of the trouble I got into took place in Lacey. But then subsequent to that time, I went to college at Western Washington University, so it was in Bellingham, it was in Seattle, Bloomington, Bowling Green, so we're all over the place. I think I mentioned Germany, Germany, born in Japan, so Georgia's in there at some point. It gets confused. When Janice asked me to do this, I had to go back and find all kinds of things that my parents had kept because I couldn't remember the first 6 years of my life because you move around so much. Our summer vacations were doing that. Our summer vacations were packing up the car, throwing a tent on the roof, and going up to British Columbia and fishing. And I hate fishing. And so I was a pretty unhappy camper, literally. That's actually a pretty good sized fish there. That's a rainbow trout caught at Harvey Hall Lake outside of Princeton, British Columbia. That could be the biggest fish I ever caught. But most of the people would get up, my dad would get up and go fishing in the morning and come back and have the coffee ready for everybody else when they got up. And then he'd clean the trout, see what was in their stomach, and then tie flies that looked like the trout all afternoon so they could use them in the evening at the evening hatch. And as a 13-year-old, that was pretty boring. So I read a lot of books.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
What did I want to be when I grew up? I took an aptitude test, and it confirmed what I thought I wanted to be. And there were 2 things I wanted to be, and the aptitude test confirmed both of them. I thought, I hate fishing, I thought I wanted to be a forest ranger. I like the idea of the solitude of the forest ranger, and I like the idea of hanging out with animals, because I've seen all these, Snow White and all and they all talk, so I have to imagine the squirrels and the chipmunks that come. And I wanted to be a priest. We had priests in my life the whole time I was growing up. There was always 1 or 2, and by the time we moved to Olympia, a lot of priests who were regulars in our house. And so that's what I thought I wanted to do. So the forest ranger thing, not so close to what I do now, but sometimes I find myself ministering to people in a different way.
So I have a couple more photographs.
Yeah, that's my mom with my kids. And my dad, when he got out of the service, was a high school history teacher.
Is that one uncanny or what? I hear whispering. Is that amazing?
Which what?
Your dad.
Yeah. He was smart, but he was really weird too. I need to look at Judy and see if she's nodding her head. He would teach. He'd teach, and then when summer came around, he'd sit for a week and just read books that he wanted to read, and you couldn't talk to him. And then he would put on his lederhosen. I don't know if you all know what lederhosen are. These are leather shorts that he then wore for the whole summer. He wore them constantly when we were camping, so they had fish blood on them, and they smelled like a campfire, and they looked like hell. And in the evenings, he'd have his lederhosen on, a cigar in his hand, and a martini glass, and then he'd hold court in the living room. So it's kind of great fun. Students loved him. He was a great teacher. But just kind of that personality carried over to the classroom. I think that they appreciated that. My mom raised us. She worked as our parent my whole life. And then when I became older, when I reached adulthood, she went to the college that my dad had graduated from and convinced them to start a consignment shop. And so she ran a consignment shop at St. Martin's College for 20 years and made thousands of dollars for scholarships at St. Martin's. So always very proud of her. And she was the best fisher person in the family. She could outfish anybody else in the family. with the possible exception of my brother. But she was luckier than him. My brother was really, really good. I mean, he was really good. If you've all seen A River Runs Through It, and the Brad Pitt character that can do anything with a fly rod in her hand, that was my brother. That was my brother. But my mom, the fish liked her, so she brought home.
Where'd you go to high school?
I went to high school at St. Martin's High School in Olympia, Washington, and it was a 4-year male boarding school, preparatory school, 450 boys. I'm not going to say they were men. By maybe at the time they were seniors, they were men. I didn't board though. I commuted from home because it was my hometown, and so I was affectionately known as a day dog. And there were about 40 or 50 day dogs in the high school, and we were always kind of looked out from because we were from the big cities of Tacoma and Seattle and Spokane. We were just from little, local yokel Lacey, and I think about the people that I went through that high school with. Those 10 or 12 day dogs, they did pretty well for themselves. So I take great pride in being from Lacey and being a day dog and being at St. Martin's and being taught by a whole bunch of really interesting Benedictine monks. And that was a really good educational experience, a very rigorous educational experience. And I think it paid off for me in the long run. I took my best friend's girlfriend to senior prom because I was too shy to ask anybody else to go to prom. So Bonnie Blake went to prom with me. Discreetly kissed on the cheek at the end of the night. And that was my date. That was my high school date. I mean, the whole of high school, not just... I went to a Gulf high school. Come on.
So those of us who are Gen Xers and millennials
Yeah.
in the room, when you say went to high school in the 60s, we have a picture.
Yeah.
Was your high school experience anything like that?
No, not at all. No, my high school's picture was an experience like that. Now, the one thing, and then you don't have a picture there of this, but my junior year in high school, my dad went to Utah State University to do a master's degree, and so we moved to Logan, Utah. And that was 1968, 67, 68, and Logan, Utah, summer 68, we're talking, the United States is exploding in the summer of 68, lots of things going on. And I'm stuck in Logan, Utah, which was about 20 years behind the times, I think. I showed Janice the yearbook from it, and she goes, looks like a yearbook from the 1940s, and it did look like a yearbook from the 1940s. Very interesting to be in Logan. I come from a pretty privileged background and have lived a pretty privileged life, so I don't think of myself as in any way ever having been marginalized. But the closest I probably ever came to experiencing that was living in Utah. We were the Catholics in a Mormon community, and we didn't fit. We were always kind and generous and polite, but we were part of the religious community, and we were transients in the local community. There were 3 of us in junior year English class. Myself, my friend Con, who was the son of one of the other people going to the same program my dad was, and another young man whose name I can't remember right now, who had come in the 2nd grade to Logan school system. And we were the new kids. The 2nd grader was still a new kid, because he hadn't been born in Logan, he hadn't grown up there from kindergarten on. So it was kind of interesting to kind of not be part of things and know that there was nothing you could do to become part of it. A bunch of us found the local Presbyterian minister's house, and he had set up his garage as a coffee house. And it's the first place I ever heard Simon and Garfunkel. And I went back and drank hot cider and poured out the Simon and Garfunkel record in his garage, because it made me feel like I was a little more in touch with what was going on in the 1960s and what was going on in Logan. I went back to Olympia and finished up my rest of the year.
How'd did the Vietnam War affect you and your family?
You know, the Vietnam War really didn't affect me much, other than the fact that my brother was drafted, and so there was always a concern in the family where he would end up. He ended up in Germany, so that was a good deal. I, like everybody else, I went to register for the draft and got my registration, and then quickly got a student deferment. So I had student deferment for the 4 years that I was in college, and junior year of college, I think is when they instituted the lottery. So you got a number, and that number determined where you were going to be drafted. And my number was 56. That's pretty low. So if my deferment had expired, there was no doubt that I would have been drafted. And I graduated in 73 from Western Washington, and I think the draft ended in 74. So things had tailed off, and I was never called up. You know, Western Washington, we were kind of out there in the corner of the United States that was a little bit removed from all the turbulence that was hitting the other parts of the country. And so I do remember Dick Gregory, who was a famous African-American comedian and anti-war protester, came to Centralia Community College, where I did my first 2 years of college, and that caused a bit of a ruckus because we had that part of Washington was pretty heavily militarized. There were a lot of people who, like my dad, had gone to retire out of Fort Lewis, Washington, or Fort Air Force Base or Bremerton Naval Station. So there was a lot of ex-military folks out there. And to have this guy come and speak against the war was a little bit of a shock to Centralia, Washington. And there was a little bit of a ruckus around the flagpole one day about are we going to take down the flag, are we going to keep the flag up? But that was about it. It was all pretty much at a distance.
How did you choose to go to college?
How many years did I go to college?
No, how did you choose?
How did I choose to go to college? Oh yeah, that was chosen for me. The deal was pretty simple because my folks, they had some money. They were helping my brother go to college, but they didn't have a whole lot of money. And so what I was told was I could go to community college and live at home for the first 2 years, and then I could transfer to the private college, to St. Martin's College, where I'd gone to high school, and they covered my tuition, and I'd live at home, so there'd be no room to board. Or I could go to a state school and they'd pay the whole freight, because that was about equal. Tuition at private college, tuition at board at state school. So I wasn't ready to move away. I only had one date, and it was kind of shocking. So I lived at home for the first 2 years, went half a mile away from the house every morning and caught a bus and went down to Centralia Community College, 25 miles away. Great educational experience at Centralia, really, really good liberal arts education at Centralia at that time. We had a locker, and it was like high school with ashtrays. And I did that for 2 years. And then I went to St. Martin's, the school my dad had graduated from, the school that my brother had graduated from, the school that I got to high school at, and was at St. Martin's. And October 30th of 1973, I think, maybe 72, I went to Western Washington College and visited my friend Tom Bowman. And we went to a kegger. And I had never been to a college party before. And I went, wow, I've been missing something. I thought it was all about studying, and I had a job in the afternoon, and I went to my job, and I transferred the next day. And my grades fell a whole grade point. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about life and kind of being on my own and growing up and having fun and hanging out with a bunch of guys that probably I should have been hanging out with. And, that picture is my 21st birthday. That would qualify as hazing now. They came and a bunch of them showed up in my room and stripped me down to my underwear. put this white dinner jacket on me and vinyl visor. There's a red rose in the dinner jacket, a pair of black loafers, and then shoved me in a trunk and carried me to the only dining hall on campus and paraded through the dining hall with this trunk and then put it up on a table and then opened it up. And I had to get out. And I got out, and they had birthday cake, so that was kind of nice. That was the payoff. They had birthday cake, we had dinner. The place was really quiet while they were bringing it in. I got it, everybody applauded, and then I went back to eating. I finished up, I'm ready to go back to my residence hall room. And they go, no, you gotta get back in the trunk. It's like, oh man, I've already been in the trunk. So they put me in the trunk and they drove me to downtown Bellingham, Washington, and left me at a hamburger place in the trunk and drove off. And I'm in the trunk for about 5 minutes and I hear knock, 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 knock. Yes, and then I hear a woman's voice. Is there anybody in there? Yes. Are you nude? Almost, but would you let me out anyway? So they let me out, and the other group was all standing across the way watching all this happen. And so I actually got back to my room before they did. So that was and then there were 7 of us. We moved into a house that was better left unsaid what happened in that house. But that was a good experience. I did the 3 colleges in 4 years. So that's one of my proudest accomplishments. Is I went to college, 3 different colleges, but finished up in 4 years. But I had 1,000,000 credits by the time I was done. I transferred so many times.
And where did this lead? What did you want to do when you graduated?
I was going to do what my dad did. I wanted to be a high school history teacher. Yeah, and that's what I wanted to do. And so I studied history. I took some teacher education courses. Did my student teaching at Lincoln High School, Intercity High School in Tacoma, Washington. And that was a really, really good experience. I loved the students that I got to work with, and I think we got along really well. And then the year after I graduated, I got a job at St. Charles Borromeo Grade School in Tacoma, teaching 7th and 8th grade language arts, coaching the 7th grade girls softball team, and teaching 7th grade art.
You ready for this?
I was pretty cool. What you can't tell from that is that there are bell bottoms, black bell bottoms, and underneath there, and probably some rather high heels too. So, yeah, that's the class picture from my 7th grade class. And the fact that I look like that explains a lot as to why I was a really bad 7th grade teacher. I just wasn't very good at it. I didn't do very well. I lasted a year. And then I was kind of knocking around doing odd jobs for a while. And I got a call from the president of St. Martin's College, comes back into my life again. A call from a man named Father Matthew Noms. I had been an altar boy for Father Matthew. And I came into his office and he said, I understand you're looking for work. And our financial aid director is leaving in 2 months. Would you like to be director of financial aid? And I had never stepped foot in any kind of student affairs office my whole career. I had spent maybe a half an hour talking to faculty members about academic advising. My experience with college was you went to classes and that's what college was. And I'd certainly never been in a financial aid office because my parents were able to afford, based on this live-at-home model that we had, to cover my tuition, and I worked to cover my other expenses. And so my answer was, of course I'd like to be your financial aid director. I have no idea who it is, but of course I will do that, because I needed a job. And so they hired me, and I didn't put the place out of business the first year. Really was taken under the tutelage of a number of experienced financial aid officers at the private colleges in Washington, and they taught me so much, and they were so kind and generous with their time. And I really got to like the financial aid a lot, really got to like it a lot. And I was there for 2.5 years, and then I went up to Seattle University as first assistant director of financial aid and then director of financial aid. I was there for about another 4 years. So 7.5 years doing financial aid altogether. Yeah.
Talk more about your community of colleagues when you were in financial aid.
Well, you know, I remember going, the private colleges in Washington all belonged to an association, Independent Colleges in Washington, and that association would bring different members of the private college community together to talk with them about once a month. So one month they bring all the presidents to Seattle, and the presidents would sit around and talk about, you know, what's going on in your campuses and how do we shape legislation in Washington and how do we shape legislation in Olympia. And then the next month it would be the senior financial officers, and then maybe the VPSAs. Well, every 6 months it was the financial aid officers. And I remember I went to the first one of those meetings, and I knew nothing about financial aid. I really knew nothing about it. And I sat around and I listened to these people. Some people had been doing financial aid. This was in the early 70s. They've been doing financial aid since the National Defense Student Loan Program was created in the 1950s, 1958, I think that program was created. And they were so smart. Man, they were smart. We went to lunch and I turned to one of them who was kind of my age and I said, I'll never know what you people know. I just will never, ever have this depth of understanding that you do. And they reached out to me and said, yeah, you'll get it, you'll figure it out. And they got me involved in the State Financial Aid Association and then the National Financial Aid Association. Met a woman named Shirley Ort who was roommates with a woman named Judy Gardner. Shirley introduced me to Judy when I was at Seattle University. Judy cooked really well, and I didn't want to cook very much. So I hung out at her house, and she always had guys around that she was cooking for, so I thought I'd be one of the guys she could cook for too. And that turned out really well, that relationship. That turned out better than well for me. I'm not sure about her.
Why did you decide to leave financial aid?
Why did I decide, or when did I decide? I knew that if I wanted to do anything else, I was at Seattle University, pretty small school at that time, 4,500 students. I knew that if I wanted to do anything else, I would need some additional credentialing. And so my plan was to go get a master's degree. And there weren't any preparation programs in the Washington area. Azusa Pacific probably had the best known preparation program on the West Coast. At that time, by then Judy and I were married. She was working at the University of Washington, and I was at Seattle University. And we talked about it, and we said, let's go to school, and let's go someplace we've never been before. And so we cast about. I talked to people that I got to know, some good friends at Seattle University, and said, where should I apply? And Michigan State showed up on the list, Far Broad showed up on the list, IUP showed up on the list, Bowling Green showed up on the list, Indiana University showed up on everybody's list. So those are the places I applied. And I could only visit one of them because we both quit our jobs in December of 1981 and then went to Europe for 7 months and backpacked. So I could only go to one campus and visit it. And the first one I went to visit was IU. So that's where I ended up, partly because I couldn't go to the other place to visit. I didn't get it. I got a rejection letter from Bowling Green State University. My first day at Bowling Green, Carney Strange hands me my file and says, here's your letter that we rejected you. And I thought, thanks, Carney. He didn't do that. Jerry Settlemyer did it, but that's okay. But I'm in good company. Ellen Broida was rejected at Bowling Green too. So that's a totally unique picture on the left. No one has ever had their picture taken in front of the Eiffel Tower. There might be some since then, but not before that. We kind of set the standard. So we traveled for 7 months throughout Europe and just had a great experience, and probably confirmed a number of things for us. It confirmed that we really liked traveling. It confirmed that we really liked each other, and it confirmed that we could be that close proximity for that length of time and get along pretty well. So
you stayed there?
Yeah. Yeah. So that was fun. I mean, we were all over the place. The other pictures in Switzerland, that's in Switzerland.
How did that trip affect who you and your family have become?
Well, I think it really broadened our worldview, it broadened our understanding of who people are and how people are different and how people are in many ways the same, and the commonality that we share with a lot of people. You know, Judy and I really did, with the exception of maybe the picture on the right, it was pretty much the castle and cathedral and museum tour. We spent a lot of time in museums. And so, you know, it was a learning experience trying to figure out what these pieces of art were about and what was important in confirming my love of history and her love of history. And we've passed this on to the children, I think. I know we've passed on the travel bug to them. They both have that. But I think they like those other things too. They don't fight if we say, let's go to a museum. You know, they'll hang out at the Van Gogh Museum for 4 hours with us and at least say they enjoy it.
But eventually you had to come back.
Eventually came back in August and packed up a Ryder truck with all our possessions, or two birds, had it between us in the truck all the way from Olympia, Washington to Bloomington, Indiana. Got to Bloomington, and it wasn't like it is now, where there were people to meet you there and help you unpack. And so we were staying on the 9th floor of Campus View Apartments, and had to move all of our stuff in by ourselves. And Judy had never been in the Midwest before, and it was hot and it was humid, and I don't think she'd ever experienced humidity before either. And I know she'd never seen a cockroach before. And if she could have turned the truck around and go back that first day, she probably would have done that. She wasn't sure what she'd signed on for. And it took us a while to get settled in. I was really lucky because I had a built-in support group immediately. I had a bunch of classmates in the master's program. A lot of people up in the upper left-hand picture there. That's a party at the final episode of MASH. Some of you don't even know MASH, but it was a really popular television show. And we had this big party at the Union, and Deb Hunter's on the right there, and Dave Hall's on the left, Phil Chamberlain's a faculty member on the left. George isn't in that picture, but George was in a dress blue uniform. He came as a general or something like that. And then that's commencement. I could not have asked for a better graduate school experience. I could not have asked for a better graduate school experience. I just had great colleagues. I started in the master's program, and I had my assistantship in the Higher Education and Student Affairs office, and so I started with this great group of master's students. Jamie Washington was in my class, John Salmeyer, Jim Street, Tim Schreier, Suzanne Mintz, Martha Pitts, a long time director of admission out of Oregon State. Vernon Wall was a year ahead of us. And then my first year, I got to talk with the faculty, and I said, how do I get to do what you do? This teaching thing was kind of interesting. I still had this teaching bug in me. I said, how do I get to do what you do? And every one of them, Phil Chamberlain, George Coomes, Don Hostler, said, well, you got to do a doctorate, and you better do it while you're here, because if you leave, you won't come back and do it. And they were right. And so they very generously allowed me to move over to the doctoral program. I never finished my master's degree. Moved over to the doctoral program, and then ran into this new group of just amazing people to study with. Some of them I mentioned earlier, Kathleen Manning, and Jill Carnegie, and Peter Golda, and Patrick Love, and Deb Hunter, and Fran, Doug Olander, Bob Thomas, and Neil Edmond, and the list went on and on. And the faculty were really interesting. They were studying fascinating stuff at that time. George was just getting into campus culture stuff. Many of us work with a man named Dave Clark, who people in college and administration areas know much better than people in higher education, but he was doing stuff on alternative perspectives on organization, and I was around all these really smart people I liked a lot, learning from really smart people who I liked a lot, and we would have conversations in class, and then we'd go to Mother Bears across the street and continue the conversation across the street, and it was just a vibrant, wonderful, supportive, learning community. And we worked hard in class, but we also worked hard to have fun with each other. That sense of community was really important. So I couldn't have asked for a better experience. Could not have asked for a better experience. The other person in there that Jamie is hugging is my best friend from graduate school. That's Ingrid Lundquist. Ingrid works for Penn State University, working with high school students in Western Pennsylvania, and she's my daughter's godmother. So, and we have Thanksgiving with Ingrid. So yeah, along the way, Emma was born while we were in Bloomington. And I'm going to stop there. Judy always has a follow-up line, and I won't use that because I don't want to offend anybody from Indiana. She said she had to get her out of Indiana before she started talking like a Hoosier. And then Brendan, that's the one on the left. He was born our first year in Bowling Green. So he was born our first year in Bowling Green, and he's like 1.5 maybe there. And we're sitting on a front porch. And I don't know why we did that. That's what you do. You take pictures of your family, right?
So Brendan was born in Bowling Green. So
Yep.
How did you get to Bowling Green?
Car.
Okay,
I got to Bowling Green. I got to Bowling Green because they had a visiting faculty member position, and George Koo called up Carney Strange. George and Carney had been classmates together at the University of Iowa, and George said, "I've got this young guy, and I think he might be okay, and why don't you test him out? Making a commitment to it. It's a visiting position. You can see if he does what it takes to be an effective faculty member. If he doesn't, I don't think he said that. So I went there on a visiting appointment, did that for 2 years, and the tenure track position opened up. And by then I was the most qualified because I taught all the courses in the program. And so they put me into that, and the rest is kind of history, I guess. But when I came to BGSU, Jerry Saddlemeyer was still on the faculty, Audrey Ritz was on the faculty. Leela Moore had been there the year before because they brought her in for a year to develop competencies for our students that we could use as skills to guide their professional practice. And those competencies are really the genesis of the CPA enhancement competencies. Nancy Evans had been there before she went to IU. I studied with Nancy. Bob, I forgot to mention you. You were there. Bob Schwartz was at IU too. Nancy Evans had been at IU, and the last year I was there, she left. I think she went to, I want to say she went to Penn State. I got a little confused about where she traveled around the time. And so they needed somebody to teach classes, so they let me teach a couple classes at IU, and that kind of gave me some experience that paid off when I went to Bowling Green. So it was Pat King. Pat King was there, and we stayed in Pat's house for the first week that we were in Bowling Green. And then I got to meet these wonderful, wonderful students that I've been blessed to with all these years. Yeah, there they are. That's all. That's the totality. That's everything.
We could do about an hour and a half of pictures.
Yeah.
I know you said last night at the reception it's a hard question to answer in some ways, but what makes the Bowling Green program special?
Well, I used to talk about the uniqueness of the program and kind of highlight our internships, or our cooperative college internships, and Jerry Saddlemeyer brought that model with him when he came to direct the program. But a lot of programs have caught up with that now. A lot of programs are doing that, and so I think we're a little less unique about that. I think what makes it special is that there are a group of faculty members that really like spending time with their students. We're a very atypical program, I think. Not student affairs program, but we're a very atypical academic program in that if you come into our suite of offices, most of us are there most of the time, most days. Stan, you've visited and you've seen that culture. I think that's the heart of what the program is about. It's about, we're Bowling Green, stuck in Northwest Ohio, and we're a regional state university, and so that's not, doesn't necessarily carry the same cachet as Ohio State does or Indiana does. So we have to just have to work sometimes a little bit harder at something. And I think what we try to do is really, really attend to our students' needs. And we do that because you guys are so darn good. You guys are really good. It's just, it's a pleasure to be able to do that. But most days, lunch takes place on the couch in the outer office, and in any given day, it's going to be 4 faculty members and 8 or 9 students. They're going to be sitting around. Students get a little tired about hearing about cholesterol levels, hairballs from cats, and we don't talk as much anymore about interest rates on houses, but that was big at certain products.
So Mike, I've made a list of questions, much like prelims, that I'm going to grill you on for about an hour.
Okay, all right. Well, we've got 12 minutes,
the
so
essential
we'll see how
philosophical
that works.
pieces. I really wish I'm only partially kidding. I did actually come up with some of these questions, but I'm going to move on to your other major area of expertise and ask some questions about that.
Yeah.
So why beer?
It's really good. I like its taste. When we were living in Seattle, the craft beer movement had just begun. And the craft beer movement in the United States, you can really trace to a guy named Fritz Maytag in San Francisco, who created a beer called Anchorstein beer. And I bought some Anchorstein beer in 1980 and thought, and I'd been drinking kind of mainline lager beers, West Coast lager beers. So it was Rainier and Olympia and Buckhorn, and I'm trying to think what some other ones were. There were a couple other ones. So that's what I thought beer tasted like. This didn't taste like anything I ever had before. It's like, wow, this is really different. And then we went to Europe. And then we were in Germany, we're drinking beer. And then we're in Austria, we're drinking beer. And then we go to England, we're drinking beer. And then we're in Ireland, we're drinking beer. And it was different in each one of these countries. So it was an intellectual thing for me. It was like, it's really good, and I like it, but it's all different. How can it be all different? And that's still an intellectual thing for me. It's still about trying to learn as much as I can about it. And the other thing is about it, it's a very communal drink. People drink beer in community. I think people drink hard liquor frequently in the solitary confines of their plush leather chair and slippers and good book. But that's not where you drink beer. You drink beer like you see in that picture, and if I'm not mistaken, you're in that picture, aren't you, Janice? Yeah. We took 17 people to Belgium to drink beer 2 years ago, and we had a marvelous time. So that's why.
Yeah. So you answered right. That's where I was going.
Okay, good.
Yes, as a reflection, we spend a lot of time talking, preparing for this, and the points at which you most light up when we talk about various things and can be very eloquent is the moments of community when you bring people together. And I had never thought of beer that way, but when you started talking about it, the beer tastings you do, the trips you do, the evenings at ACPA,
Right.
It's the beer's a piece of it, but it's really not the center.
No, it's about having great people to spend an evening with and talk and laugh and make fun of Maureen on occasion. Although she doesn't like beer, so she doesn't. When I was at St. Martin's College, so it was run by Benedictine monks, and they have a very long history, a very, very long history. And Friday afternoon at St. Martin's at 4:30, the treasurer, who was one of the monks, would come across from the abbey with a gallon of wine, a big gallon jug. And people would meet in the bursar's office and have a glass of wine every Friday. And I thought that's what happened on all college campuses. Because I thought this is the way it should be. We went there and we sat and we talked about the week and shared stories and said, so-and-so's in the residence hall, and they might have to move out of the residence hall because they can't afford it. Oh, well, I'm the financial aid director. Let me look into that and see if I can fix that. Hospitalitas is a core value of the Benedictine. And so hospitality is something that's very, very important to me. And at the heart of that, I think, is this idea of community. And community is what I found in the higher education student affairs program at Bowling Green. Community is what I found in the city of Bowling Green. Community is what I found at ACPA. That's why I come back to ACPA, is to be part of that community. So, a pretty important piece of the puzzle.
So this last slide here is, it's an opportunity. I'm sure a million people ask you this all the time. What's next? What are you going to do in retirement? What do you want to do with your time?
I've always supported an inner city mission wherever I've been. I did it in Seattle, I did it in Toledo. I've only been able to do that financially. I want to give them some time now, so I'm going to work with the mission in Toledo a couple days a week, I think. This may be a question that's going to come up later, but if I could have a dream job, I'd like to be a blue badge guide in Oxford, England. That's not going to happen. Closest I could probably come is to be a docent at the Toledo Museum of Art. So I'm going to go through docent training, say, oh, let's go look at this painting, try to figure out why and so forth. Semester C is a possibility. I think I might like to do that, but that looks a lot like work. And at this point, I'm more interested in relaxing. And there'll be travel. There'll be stuff to do around the house. Get a little more time to spend with the dog, the cat.
The dog. It's a cute dog.
He's a cute dog. He's a good dog. He's a really good dog.
Unlike your cat.
Unlike my cat. My cat's a jerk. My cat's a jerk. But he's little and he's learning. He's growing up, and I got to be patient with him. I was a jerk when I was his age too.
All right, we're to the last piece here. When James Lipton does the interviews, he always ends with the questions for the guests. The 10 questions come from a French series, but they're also questions that Mike has used in this session over the years, so they will not come as a surprise to Mike.
They shouldn't come as a surprise.
All right, what is your favorite word?
Hope. Hope. I had a student, Meryl Hope Taylor, and I just thought she had the best name that I could imagine. Scripture tells us the three greatest gifts are faith, hope, and love. Hope's the one that's always resonated with me.
What is your least favorite word?
Ignorance.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
I thought about that one. Really bright people. Really bright people. I want to be around people that are really smart and interesting and well-read and can teach me something. Yeah.
What turns you off?
Snow blowing.
What is your favorite curse word?
Goddamn son of a bitch. That's 4.
What sound or noise do you love?
You know, we live a block from the city park in Bowling Green, and there's a public pool at the city park, and we can sit on our porch in the summertime and we can hear the kids playing in the pool at the city park in Bowling Green, and that's a pretty special sound. It's a happy sound. It's laughter. It's giggling. It's screaming. That might be my favorite sound.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Snow blowers.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Yeah, I think I really would like to be a blue badge guide in Oxford. I just think it would be wonderful to be able to do that.
What is that?
Well, they're people who actually get tested and then know everything there is to know about the local community, and then are formally endorsed by the tourist information. And then they take people around and say, this is Oxford. Oxford, England, not Oxford, Ohio. I don't know the
Which is a nice place to live. What profession would you not like to do?
You know, I don't think I could be a firefighter. I don't think I could do that. Man, that just looks like, it looks like really hard work, and I think it would just be so emotional, draining, that I admire them greatly, but I don't think I could do that.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Yeah, I've got two answers to that one. One of them has been shared in this setting before, and one of them comes from Scripture, and it's, well done, O good and faithful servant. I would like to hear that. And the second one is, the beer's cold, your family's here. Come on in. Wonderful.
Mike Coomes.
Thank you all for coming.